Welcome to Silent Secrets. I'm your host for tonight's mystery. Today's tale begins with a quiet moment, a simple knock, a forgotten letter, and a truth that was never meant to be discovered. Chapter 1. The storm gathers the cafe. Was nearly empty that afternoon, the usual hum of conversation reduced to the occasional clink of cups and the soft rustle of newspapers. Outside, rain fell in determined sheets, hammering against the glass like impatient fingers. Each tap a reminder of the storm approaching the coast. I had taken my usual corner seat, notebook and pen at hand, when the door swung open and in walked one of those figures whose presence suggests that some small, curious mystery is about to unfold. Charcoal Point Lighthouse, I would soon learn, was not a place one visited lightly. Perched on the jagged cliffs that jutted into the North Sea, it had a lonely, almost menacing beauty. The building itself was stout and formidable, its whitewashed walls streaked with years of salt and wind, and its beacon, when lit, a steadfast eye in the darkness. But on nights such as this, when the sea roared and waves battered the cliffside with a ferocity that seemed unnatural, it became an island of isolation, a small world cut off from all human comfort. I was introduced to the case the following morning, though I could scarcely have imagined the drama that awaited me. 5 people had been trapped at Charcoal Point. During the storm, the lighthouse keeper, a retired naval officer named Captain Harold Sinclair, a young artist, Miss Clara Jennings, visiting the area to capture the bleak beauty of the cliffs, a businessman, Mr. Edward Rathbone, whose sharp suit and sharper eyes betrayed a life of calculated ambition, a scholar, Dr. Leonard Greaves, who seemed more comfortable among books than among people, and finally, the local innkeeper's daughter, Miss Lily Hart, whose practical nature and keen observation often went unnoticed by the others, yet would prove pivotal. The storm arrived with little warning. One moment, the skies were a dull, threatening grey. The next, the wind had risen into a howl, and the tide, unseasonably high, had cut off the narrow winding road that led from the mainland to the lighthouse. By evening, Charcoal Point was isolated. The 5 strangers, none of whom had known each other previously, were forced to remain under the same roof. The lighthouse, though sturdy, was not designed for comfort. Its small rooms were cold, damp and furnished sparsely, a fireplace in the common room that struggled against the draught, a dining table scarred by years of salt and spills, and chairs that creaked under the slightest movement. Captain Sinclair, the lighthouse keeper, did what he could to make his guests feel at ease. A man of broad shoulders and graying hair, he carried the air of authority that comes from years spent managing life and death situations at sea. "We shall be safe here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Though the storm has a temper of its own, nothing escapes Charcoal Point tonight." Yet even as he spoke, there was a tightness to his jaw, an almost imperceptible tension that suggested he was as wary as anyone of what the night might bring. Miss Jennings, the young artist, had a notebook clutched to her chest. She sketched furiously, even as the wind rattled the windows, capturing the shadows and light of the interior with a feverish energy. Her eyes, dark and observant, seemed to see more than the room itself, as though she were already anticipating the human drama that might unfold. Mr. Rathbone, meanwhile, prowled the small common room like a predator, assessing his territory. He asked questions that seemed casual, but were always loaded, probing the others for information, motives, or weaknesses. Dr. Greaves, the scholar, kept to a corner, muttering to himself about weather patterns and lighthouse mechanisms. He was an amiable man, but one who drew suspicion merely by his obsessive attention to detail. Miss Hart moved quietly among them, serving tea and biscuits, her expression polite but reserved. She noticed everything, though she spoke little, and her eyes often lingered on Mr. Rathbone, as if she instinctively mistrusted his presence. Dinner was a tense affair, each person retreating inward as the storm grew more aggressive. Rain pounded the roof, and gusts of wind rattled the shutters. Conversation was polite but strained. Each guest sensed, in some unspoken way, that isolation has a peculiar effect on the human mind. Captain Sinclair told stories of his years at sea, tales of narrow escapes and storm-tossed vessels, all designed to calm his guests, yet even he seemed conscious of the mood, which grew heavier as night fell. The lighthouse itself was a maze of corridors and narrow stairways, each step echoing ominously in the small, empty building. The storm outside was relentless, and the sound of waves smashing against the cliffs was a constant reminder of their separation from the world beyond. Even those accustomed to solitude, like the captain or the scholar, found the night oppressive. Shadows seemed to twist in the flickering firelight, and every creak of timber or gust against the window was magnified into a harbinger of unseen danger. As evening deepened, Poirot arrived. It was not under dramatic circumstances. He never allowed drama to choose him, but rather at the quiet insistence of his own curiosity. He had heard of the unusual gathering, the storm's ferocity, and the peculiarities reported by a local resident who had observed the lighthouse from afar. His entrance was unassuming, a man of modest height, impeccably dressed, with a meticulously groomed moustache and eyes that missed nothing. He took in the room with a glance that was at once benign and penetrating. "Mesdames, amis," he said, in his measured, precise manner. "It appears that nature herself has conspired to bring together a curious assortment of personalities. Ah, the storm. It is as though the heavens have sent us into a theater of suspense." His tone was light, but his gaze lingered on each person, cataloguing expressions, posture, and minute gestures. It was immediately clear that Poirot's presence altered the atmosphere. Where tension had been polite and simmering, it now sharpened into anticipation. The captain, who had been quietly proud of his management of the storm, glanced at Poirot with a hint of professional curiosity. The guests, who had felt themselves alone against the elements, were suddenly aware of an intellect in the room capable of perceiving more than the storm, more than the obvious human behaviors. The night wore on, conversation dwindled, the fire flickered low, and the storm showed no sign of relenting. Shadows moved along the walls, distorted by the wavering flame, and every sound, the wind, the waves, the distant call of some unseen bird, was amplified in the minds of the stranded five. Poirot, seated comfortably, quietly observed, asking occasional questions that seemed innocuous, but hinted at an underlying method. And then, as the clock struck midnight, the first subtle indication that this would be no ordinary storm night presented itself. A scream, sharp, sudden, and terrifying. It pierced the roar of the wind and the crash of the waves. It came from the direction of the upper floor, where each guest had retreated to their rooms. The storm, which had seemed merely an external threat, now became a curtain behind which something far more sinister was unfolding. The guests rushed to the source of the sound, only to find themselves confronted with a scene that would mark the beginning of a long and perilous night. One of the five stranded, was dead. The body lay awkwardly, unnaturally, in the narrow landing, and the room seemed to shrink under the weight of fear. Poirot stood back, calm, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in every detail. "Ah," he murmured quietly, "the storm is not the greatest danger tonight. No, it is the human heart, with its secrets, its passions, and perhaps its resentments, that is the true tempest." And so, in the isolated lighthouse battered by wind and rain, the stage was set. The storm raged outside, but inside the drama of suspicion, revelation, and deduction had only just begun. Each guest, unaware of the secrets of the others, and perhaps even of their own hidden impulses, was about to become a player in a game orchestrated by an intellect unlike any they had encountered. Hercule Poirot. The night stretched on, and the lighthouse, once a place of safety, had transformed into a theater of tension, shadows, and subtle menace. Outside, the storm continued its furious dance. Inside, every glance, every gesture, and every whispered word would become a clue for the brilliant mind of Poirot to unravel. And thus, with the rain lashing and the waves threatening, the first chapter of this curious and perilous tale came to its close. The storm had gathered, and with it, a mystery that would test the limits of observation, reasoning, and human understanding. One of the five stranded souls would not survive. And the question that now hung in the damp, cold air was simple, yet terrifying. Who was responsible, and why? Chapter 2. The keeper's warning. Old Samuel, the assistant lighthouse keeper, was a man of sturdy build and weathered features, his face etched with the kind of lines that only decades of salt, wind, and isolation can create. He moved with deliberate care, as though each step on the narrow spiral stairs of Charcoal Point Lighthouse carried with it the weight of memory and experience. His eyes, though clouded slightly by age, were sharp, and they missed nothing. "The lighthouse is no place for wandering after dark," he warned, his voice gravelly but commanding. "The wind can twist paths, and the sea has a way of swallowing men whole. Even the bravest sailor would hesitate on these cliffs tonight." The guests, huddled in the main room, listened with polite attention, though some exchanged subtle glances of mild irritation. Captain Sinclair nodded gravely. "Samuel is right," he said. "The cliffs are treacherous, and tonight the storm is merciless. Stay inside. Do not venture beyond the lighthouse walls." Miss Clara Jennings, ever curious and restless, tilted her head. "But surely we can at least see the cliffs?" she asked, her voice tinged with excitement. Her eyes shone with that particular light that artists have when confronted with nature's raw fury, a desire to observe, to capture, to immerse. Mr. Edward Rathbone, ever pragmatic, frowned. "Observation is one thing, Miss Jennings. Recklessness is another. If Samuel says to stay put, I think it would be wise to heed his advice." He said it with the kind of quiet authority that brooked no contradiction, yet his tone carried a subtle undercurrent of impatience, as though he found restraint almost intolerable. Dr. Leonard Greaves, for his part, had long since moved to a corner, notebook in hand, recording the storm's minutiae, wind speed, rainfall, the pattern of the waves crashing below. "We must consider," he said without looking up, "that atmospheric conditions tonight are extreme. Even a small misstep outside could be fatal, statistically speaking. The probability of injury increases exponentially with exposure." Miss Lily Hart, gentle and composed, served tea, her hand steady despite the roar of the wind. She exchanged glances with Clara Jennings, a silent acknowledgement of concern. Lily's practical nature made her particularly attuned to human behavior, and she noted, as did Poirot, that the tension in the room was palpable, though unspoken. Poirot himself, seated near the fireplace, with a measured elegance, observed quietly. His moustache twitched ever so slightly as he absorbed the interactions between the lighthouse keeper, the storm, and the guests. He was intrigued by the subtle hierarchy of personalities that had begun to form. The captain's natural authority, Rathbone's ambition, Clara's impulsive curiosity, Lily's understated vigilance, and Greaves's obsessive rationality. Each, he knew, could be a piece of a puzzle yet to reveal itself. As the evening deepened, the storm intensified. The wind shrieked like some ancient creature, rattling the windows and making the walls tremble. Outside, the waves smashed against the jagged cliffs with a force that seemed almost sentient. The lighthouse, which had seemed a sanctuary in daylight, now appeared more fortress than home, a bulwark against nature's wrath, but also a cage. Then came a moment that unsettled even the most composed. The light at the top of the lighthouse, the beacon that had faithfully warned ships for decades, flickered unexpectedly. A brief, ominous pause plunged the room into semi-darkness, leaving only the firelight to illuminate the faces of the 5 stranded souls. A collective gasp echoed through the common room. Even the seasoned Captain Sinclair felt a prickle of unease. "That light," he muttered, "should never falter, not even for a moment. The mechanism is precise, maintained daily. Something is wrong." Miss Jennings clutched her notebook tighter, her knuckles whitening. "Could it be the storm?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. "It is possible," Dr. Greaves replied, adjusting his spectacles and peering through the dim firelight. "But mechanical failures at this lighthouse are exceedingly rare. The timing is peculiar." Poirot's gaze flickered toward the lighthouse walls, his expression one of quiet calculation. Peculiar indeed, my friends. The coincidence of the storm and the faltering light is most suggestive. But we must not leap to conclusions. One must always observe, note, and consider the smallest details. The guests murmured among themselves, their voices betraying a growing anxiety. Miss Hart moved to reassure them, but the tension in the air was palpable, each person acutely aware that the storm had rendered them prisoners in this isolated tower. It was then that the first scream pierced the night. Sharp, urgent, and terrifying, it echoed from the spiral stairs that led to the upper floors. The sound was immediately followed by a silence, so profound it seemed unnatural, broken only by the furious wind outside. The guests froze. Clara Jennings's eyes widened, Rathbone's jaw tightened, and even Dr. Greaves seemed momentarily speechless. The captain's hand instinctively went to his belt, a gesture of readiness he could not suppress. Miss Hart's breath caught, and she instinctively clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles pale. Poirot, however, remained composed, rising slowly to his feet. "Ah," he said, his voice calm yet carrying an authority that compelled attention. "There it is, the first note in a symphony of events that will require every ounce of our reasoning. We must proceed, but with caution. Remember, my friends, panic is the enemy of clarity." Captain Sinclair took the lead, moving swiftly toward the stairs, with Rathbone and the others following. Their footsteps tentative against the cold, worn steps. The lighthouse seemed to groan under their weight, the spiral staircase twisting upward like a funnel into darkness. Each step felt heavier, each creak more ominous, and the roar of the storm outside became almost a physical presence, pressing against them as they ascended. Poirot followed at a measured pace, observing, noting, and cataloguing. He paused to examine the walls, the railing, and the faint scuff marks on the stairs, his keen eyes discerning patterns invisible to the untrained. "Notice, my friends," he said softly, "the marks on the steps. They are recent, and yet they do not correspond with the number of people present. Curious, is it not?" At the top of the stairs, the group found the source of the scream, a small storage room where the flickering lighthouse light mechanism was housed. The door was ajar, revealing nothing at first glance except the familiar equipment and the faintly damp scent of the sea. But Poirot's sharp eyes did not miss the subtle displacement of objects. A wrench lying where it should not have been, a chair slightly knocked over, and, most significantly, a faint smear of red on the wooden floor, partially obscured by shadows. Miss Jennings gasped. It looks like blood." Rathbone moved forward cautiously, his face pale but set with determination. "We must call for help," he said. "Samuel, Captain, someone." Poirot held up a hand, his expression serene yet commanding. "No, Monsieur Rathbone, to call for outside assistance now would be premature. Observe first, deduce first. Panic benefits no one. Let us consider, carefully, what has transpired." Captain Sinclair nodded, though unease etched deeper into his face. "Poirot is right, but we must remain vigilant. Whatever has happened, it is no accident. Someone, or something, has acted deliberately." The storm raged outside, relentless and untamed, as the group gathered in the dimly lit room. The wind battered the windows, and the waves pounded the cliffs. Yet it was the presence of an unseen hand, the whisper of deliberate intention, that held their attention. Fear mingled with anticipation. Every gesture, every glance, and every word became a potential clue, a thread in the web that Poirot would begin to unravel. In the flickering shadows of Charcoal Point Lighthouse, with the storm howling like a living creature beyond the walls, the keeper's warning had taken on a more sinister meaning. The night promised little rest for death, or something close to it, had already entered their midst. And as Poirot's sharp mind catalogued every detail, every nuance of behavior, he understood that the night ahead would test not only his powers of observation, but also the resilience of the human spirit. Above all, he noted the most troubling fact: in a place so isolated, with 5 strangers and 1 cunning mind, the line between accident and intent could be razor thin. 1 misstep, 1 hidden resentment, 1 overlooked detail could change the course of the night entirely. And thus, The second chapter closed with the echo of the scream still reverberating in their ears, a haunting prelude to the unfolding drama. Charcoal Point Lighthouse, already a bastion against the storm, had become a crucible of tension, suspicion, and danger, a theater in which Hercule Poirot's intellect would soon be tested to its limits. Chapter 3. A body by the lantern room. The spiral staircase seemed interminable as the group ascended, each step reverberating through the narrow lighthouse like a warning. The wind's fury outside had grown, and the storm pounded against the walls with relentless determination, as if the elements themselves sought to punish those trapped within. Poirot followed last, moving with his customary measured grace, eyes scanning the narrow corridor and the worn steps for the slightest irregularity. A misplaced footprint, a faint smear, or a subtle scuff mark. When they reached the top floor, the atmosphere was charged with a tension that seemed almost tangible. The narrow landing was dimly illuminated by the flickering glow of the lighthouse lamp, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. It was here, just beyond the narrow doorway leading to the lantern room, that they found him, Daniel Harper, the young scholar who had joined the group at the lighthouse, lying motionless on the floor. His body was splayed awkwardly, his head turned at an unnatural angle. A faint trickle of blood marked the back of his skull, but the surrounding floor was remarkably undisturbed. No sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no scattered papers. The room was otherwise intact. The lantern itself, a massive prism of glass and brass, stood securely in its mount, the mechanism humming steadily despite the storm's rage outside. Instruments for monitoring the lighthouse's light, the levers, dials, and controls, were all in their proper places, meticulously aligned, as though no violence had occurred. The precision of the setting made the scene all the more disquieting. Captain Sinclair's face, usually composed even in moments of crisis, had paled considerably. This makes no sense," he muttered, his voice tight with disbelief. "The floor is clean. Nothing is out of place. How could someone—" Miss Clara Jennings stepped forward cautiously, her artist's eye noting every detail. She bent slightly to observe the position of Daniel's hands, the angle of his head, the way his legs lay against the cold, polished wood. "It's almost as if he fell," she said uncertainly, her voice trailing off. But how? There's nothing to trip over. No loose boards. No, nothing." Mr. Edward Rathbone frowned, suspicion flickering across his sharp features. "Fell?" he said incredulously. "From what? And why? You do realize what this implies. One of us is responsible. There is no other way out. No one could have entered this room from outside. The storm has cut off all access. There is no escape. Whoever did this is among us." The words fell like a hammer in the silent room. The wind howled beyond the walls, but it was the implication rather than the storm that gripped their hearts. Everyone exchanged uneasy glances. The room, which had seemed secure moments ago, now felt like a cage. Their isolation was absolute. The storm had made the lighthouse impregnable. The killer had no choice but to be one of them. Poirot moved slowly to the body, his small, precise hands resting lightly on his chin as he examined the scene. He did not touch the corpse. Never hastily, never carelessly, but his gaze catalogued every detail with the precision of a master watchmaker, observing the delicate gears of a clock. "Notice, mes amis," he said softly. "The position of the body. The head is struck. Yes, but the absence of disturbance is most significant. Observe the floor. There are no scratches, no footprints aside from those of the people now present. And yet, someone has acted." He bent slightly to examine the back of Daniel's head, his eyes narrowing. The wound was small but precise, delivered with skill and intent. "The instrument," Poirot murmured to himself, almost inaudibly, "must have been light yet sufficient. And the blow, so deliberate, so controlled, suggests a hand guided by experience, a hand not given to clumsiness." Miss Lilyhart, who had remained near the doorway, shivered. "But why? He has done nothing to provoke anyone. Surely none of us would." Her voice faltered, and she shook her head. She looked to Captain Sinclair, who only shook his own head gravely, as if to say that in such circumstances nothing was impossible. Rathbone stepped closer to Poirot, lowering his voice in a tone that was part accusation, part inquiry. "You, Monsieur Poirot, what do you make of this? Surely you can see Summoner here intended harm." Poirot straightened and folded his hands in front of him. His expression remained calm, almost serene, though his eyes glittered with a sharp intensity. "Ah, yes, intention is clear, but who and why? That is the question. One must not be deceived by appearances, Monsieur Rathbone. The storm may have isolated us, but it also obscures details. The solution, as always, will lie in careful observation, in the smallest gesture, in the tiniest clue overlooked by those not trained in the art of deduction." Clara Jennings knelt beside the body, her eyes wide. "Look at his hands," she said softly. "There's something written in faint ink barely visible. Could it be a note?" Poirot leaned closer. "Ah, excellent, mademoiselle. Always observe the subtleties. Every mark, every trace, every minutiae can speak volumes if one knows how to listen. But do not touch further. We must preserve everything exactly as it is. Any disturbance now could obscure the truth forever." Captain Sinclair motioned toward the door. "We cannot remain here alone. The storm will not abate, and we must ensure that no one else comes to harm. We should return to the main room and regroup. Poirot can examine the scene more thoroughly once we are all together." With careful steps, they carried Daniel's body back down the spiral staircase, the atmosphere heavy with fear and suspicion. The wind shrieked outside, the waves pounded the cliffs, and the lighthouse itself seemed to echo the tension, each creak of timber amplifying the sense of dread. Once in the common room, Poirot gathered the 5 survivors, his small stature imposing in its quiet authority. "Mes amis," he began, his tone deliberate and precise. "We are faced with a very simple fact. The murderer is among us. This is no accident, no misfortune delivered by the storm. Observe how I know this. The doors were locked from the inside. The only access is the spiral staircase, which each of you traversed under observation of others. And yet, Daniel Harper lies dead, his life ended by a deliberate blow." Rathbone's eyes narrowed. "Then who? One of us." Poirot's lips twitched in a faint, enigmatic smile. "It is clear, is it not? One of you must have acted. But to determine which? Ah, that requires patience, observation, and the careful unraveling of character, motive, and opportunity. Do not worry, mes amis. All will be revealed in due course. But for now, remember, the storm is our cage, and the truth is the key." Miss Hart quietly handed him a cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly. Poirot accepted it with a nod of thanks, his mind already cataloguing each individual's reactions, their posture, their expressions, the subtle, nearly imperceptible tells that would guide him to the murderer. Hers passed, the storm raging outside as the group sat tensely in the common room. Every movement, every whispered exchange, every glance across the firelight was noted by Poirot. He asked careful questions, seemingly innocuous, but each one was designed to provoke a reaction, to reveal something about the person answering. Clara Jennings fidgeted with her notebook, sketching lines that represented nothing in particular, yet betraying a nervousness that Poirot observed with interest. Rathbone maintained a stern composure, but his eyes darted repeatedly toward the staircase and the upper floors. Captain Sinclair, the lighthouse keeper, paced slowly, as if the very act of walking would help him impose order on chaos, and Miss Hart, ever vigilant, sat quietly, her gaze flitting between each person, cataloguing every subtle shift in behavior. Poirot's eyes, however, remained calm, calculating, precise. He knew that each reaction, each minute gesture, would form the latticework upon which the truth would be revealed. The killer had made a mistake. Some small, imperceptible clue left behind in haste, some shadow in their behavior that could be interpreted by a mind trained to see beyond the obvious. And so the night deepened. The storm continued its relentless assault on Charcoal Point, but the true tempest was not outside. It was within, simmering among the 5 trapped souls. One of them had killed, one of them harbored a secret, and one brilliant detective would piece together the intricate puzzle that had begun so innocuously with a warning, a scream, and now a body by the lantern room. In the flickering firelight, Poirot's small eyes glimmered with that unmistakable spark of certainty. He had observed enough to know that the answer lay not in what had happened, but in who could have done it, and why. The storm outside was deafening, but the storm inside the lighthouse, the storm of suspicion, fear, and hidden motive, was far deadlier. Chapter 4, Secrets in the Shadows. The storm had not abated. If anything, it had grown in ferocity. Rain lashed against the narrow windows, and wind swept across the cliffside like a furious phantom. Inside Charcoal Point Lighthouse, the faint flicker of candlelight now replaced the failed electricity, casting elongated shadows that danced on the walls and painted ghostly shapes across the room. Every movement, every whispered word seemed magnified in the dim illumination. Hercule Poirot observed from his usual place near the fireplace, his eyes reflecting the soft candlelight as he studied the group. The murder of Daniel Harper had thrown the lighthouse into a tense, almost palpable unease, and now, without the distraction of normal light, secrets began to surface as naturally as shadows, lengthening in the dark. Lena Harper, Daniel's business partner, had arrived earlier that evening, following a panic telegram she had sent from the mainland. She was a woman of composed elegance, with sharp features that hinted at both intelligence and resolve. But now, her usual calm seemed strained. She avoided everyone's gaze, moving like a shadow along the walls, her hands twisting nervously at the cuffs of her jacket. When Captain Sinclair attempted to offer reassurance, she merely nodded, her eyes fixed on some distant point outside the window, beyond the storm, as though calculating the risks of survival rather than engaging with the present. Mark Fletcher, a local reporter with a reputation for persistence bordering on intrusion, had insisted on accompanying the group to cover the storm and the lighthouse's famed isolation. Yet, when the crisis struck, he seemed more interested in his notes than in the human drama around him. He scribbled furiously, notebook open on his knees, occasionally glancing up with a keen, inquisitive stare, but never offering assistance or comfort. His presence was a peculiar one, hovering at the edges of the room, his pen poised as if recording evidence for posterity, rather than caring about the living and breathing people in the room. Old Samuel, the assistant lighthouse keeper, was perhaps the most enigmatic of all. He moved quietly, speaking only when absolutely necessary. But his eyes missed nothing. He observed each guest with the patience of a man who had lived long enough to understand the nature of human folly and deception. "Ah, Mess Amos," Poirot thought silently. "Here is a man who knows far more than he says, and in silence he has power." Samuel's quietude was not emptiness. It was knowledge, and he used it like a weapon, subtle, restrained, and potentially devastating. Poirot's mind worked swiftly, cataloguing the dynamics, the gestures, the shifting alliances and hidden tensions. Each person in the lighthouse was a complex entity, a collection of motives, impulses, and hidden desires. He noted Lena's avoidance, the reporter's indifference, and Samuel's silent surveillance. These were not mere quirks. They were clues in human form, waiting for the master detective to unravel their significance. The group attempted to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Candles were lit along the walls, casting a warm but eerie glow, and the fire crackled weakly in the hearth. Captain Sinclair tried to organize a search of the upper floors, ensuring that no further danger lurked unseen, while Poirot suggested a more methodical approach. "Mes, Amos," he said quietly, "it is better to observe first, to catalogue, and then to act. Panic leads only to error. The truth, like the light of this lighthouse, must be brought into clarity step by step." Lena moved toward a small table by the window, drawing a deep breath as though to summon courage. She clutched a folder tightly against her chest, its edges worn from frequent handling. Poirot's keen gaze immediately noticed the tension in her hands, and the deliberate way she avoided placing the folder on the table where anyone might see its contents. "Ah," he murmured to himself, "a secret carefully guarded. And yet the secret is impatient. It will speak, if only one knows how to listen. Mark Fletcher, meanwhile, continued his obsessive note. Taking his pen, scratched across the paper in a rhythm almost hypnotic, punctuated by occasional glances at the faces around him. Curious, Poirot noted, that one who claims to observe the world for the public record is oblivious to the most immediate human needs. He records, yes, but does he perceive? Perception is far subtler than mere observation. Samuel, moving quietly across the room, adjusted a candle that threatened to gutter out, his movements careful, deliberate. He spoke little, yet every action carried weight. He offered water to Miss Hart, straightened a chair, checked the alignment of the furniture, and then returned to his silent watch near the far corner. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to catalogue not only the immediate surroundings, but the unspoken tension of the room. Poirot noted it all. Samuel knows more than he admits, and it would be essential to understand the keeper's perspective before drawing any conclusions. The storm outside continued its furious assault, and the lighthouse seemed to contract under the pressure. Each creak of the timber, each gust that rattled the shutters, intensified the sense of confinement. The shadows on the walls appeared to shift and whisper, creating illusions of movement. Clara Jennings, ever sensitive to atmosphere, shivered slightly, her eyes darting toward the darker corners of the room. Poirot noted her reaction, cataloguing it in the ledger of human emotion, knowing that fear often reveals more than logic ever could. As they settled, a hushed conversation began to emerge, whispered words carefully calibrated to avoid exposure, yet betraying personal anxiety. Lena's voice, soft and controlled, revealed fragments of worry about her late partner, Daniel, and the implications of his sudden death. She avoided direct eye contact with Rathbone, whose sharp gaze and insistence on rationality seemed to provoke a defensive reflex in her. Poirot, moving quietly among them, asked careful, seemingly innocuous questions, each designed to elicit more than the spoken answer. "Mes amis," he began, "we have a unique opportunity tonight. Is it not extraordinary 5, or rather 6? Now, individuals isolated by nature, forced to confront not only the elements, but the hidden currents of human character. Tell me, Miss Harper," he said, turning to Lena. "Did your late partner have disagreements with anyone? Perhaps minor disputes, trifles that might seem insignificant to the unobservant eye?" Lena stiffened, her fingers tightening around the folder. "There were discussions," she said cautiously, "but nothing serious. Daniel was meticulous. He never allowed matters to escalate unnecessarily." Her eyes flicked toward Rathbone, then back to the floor. Poirot's small eyes, bright and sharp, caught the subtle hesitation, the micro-expression betraying a thought she had not voiced. "Ah," Poirot said softly, "even trifles can be seeds for tragedy. One does not need great quarrels to cause great harm. Sometimes the smallest spark ignites the fiercest fire." Mark Fletcher scribbled furiously, muttering under his breath about possible headlines and angles. Poirot observed him with mild amusement. "Monsieur Fletcher," he said, "one writes for the world, yet fails to perceive the truth at one's feet. Fascinating. Perhaps you record, but do you understand? That is the question." Samuel, who had so far remained a silent sentinel, finally spoke. His voice was low, deliberate, and resonant. "I have lived here a long time," he said, "and I have seen men and women tested by storms. It is not the wind or the waves that endanger them. It is fear, pride, jealousy, and secrets. This night is thick with secrets, and they will reveal themselves if one knows how to watch." Poirot's moustache twitched in a small, subtle smile. "Yes, Samuel, you understand very well. The human heart. It is a labyrinth more complex than the most intricate mechanism, and tonight that labyrinth is open before us, though not yet fully navigated. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered word is a path leading toward the truth. One must simply follow, patiently, with method." The night wore on, and the storm outside did not abate. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls that seemed to echo the hidden movements of the mind. Lena remained tense, clutching her folder, reluctant to reveal its contents. Mark continued his obsessive record. Keeping Samuel remained the quiet observer, cataloguing human behavior with the patience of a man who had long understood the subtleties of life and death. Poirot, as ever, sat composed, small hands folded, his mind working tirelessly. He was aware of the delicate threads of deception, of fear, of hidden intent weaving through the room. In the flickering candlelight, the shadows themselves seemed to whisper secrets, and Poirot, with his extraordinary perception, began to discern the outlines of motives, the faint footprints of deceit, and the intricate patterns of human behavior that would eventually reveal the murderer. By the end of the chapter, the lighthouse, isolated and battered by storm and shadow, had become more than a refuge from the elements. It had transformed into a theater of secrets, a crucible in which the hidden truths of character and motive would be revealed, step by careful step. And as Poirot's small eyes glimmered in the candlelight, one certainty was clear tonight. Every secret would matter, and every shadow could conceal the key to the murder. Chapter 5. The broken watch. The storm had not relented. Its fury was relentless, battering the lighthouse as if it sought to rattle more than the shutters, that it aimed to disturb the minds of those trapped inside. The rhythmic pounding of rain against the windows created a strange hypnotic cadence, while the wind howled along the cliffside like a creature of dark intelligence. Inside Charcoal Point Lighthouse, the 5 survivors moved cautiously, their nerves taut from the previous night's events. It was Poirot, ever meticulous, who noticed it first, a small, cracked watch lying near the base of the spiral stairs that led to the lantern room. The watch face was fractured, the minute hand frozen at 9:40. There was no indication of struggle around it. No scuff marks, no disturbed dust, nothing to suggest it had been thrown carelessly. Yet its presence there was significant, and Poirot's keen eyes detected the subtle implications immediately. He bent slightly, examining the watch with precise care. "Ah," he murmured, his voice low and measured. "The mechanism is damaged, yet the stopping point is precise. 9:40, not a random accident. Mes amis, observe, every detail is intentional, for even in a small object, one may find the traces of intention and design." Captain Sinclair leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "But what does it signify?" "Just the time." Poirot shook his head slightly, tapping the side of his moustache. "It signifies more than the time, Captain. It signifies action, timing, and the connection between events. Daniel Harper did not die by chance, and this watch, it is a clue, left perhaps unintentionally, by the hand that caused his death." Miss Lena Harper, Daniel's business partner, had been sitting quietly in a corner, her fingers clutching her folder tightly. Poirot approached her, his small eyes glimmering with precise curiosity. "Mademoiselle Harper," he said softly, "your late partner, Daniel, had mentioned concerns recently." "Yes. Financial irregularities, matters requiring exposure." Lena nodded slowly, her eyes downcast. "Yes. He planned to confront someone tonight. He believed he had discovered fraud within the company, and he intended to reveal it. I did not know the full details, only that he was determined to act, despite the storm. He did not fear confrontation. I wish he had told me who it involved." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying both fear and grief. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the cracked watch. "Ah, timing, action, opportunity. It begins to form, does it not? Daniel had a plan. Someone, knowing this plan, acted first. The storm may conceal, but the watch preserves the moment, and therein lies the mystery. Yes, mes amis, the motive is clear, but the method remains hidden." Mark Fletcher, the reporter, scribbled furiously in his notebook, occasionally glancing up with sharp curiosity. "You mean to say someone knew he intended to reveal the fraud, and took matters into their own hands?" he asked, his voice tinged with excitement and unease. "Precisely," Poirot replied. "And the careful observer will note that opportunity was constrained. The lighthouse, isolated by nature and storm, leaves no entrance for a stranger. The perpetrator is among us, must be among us. And the watch, small though it is, provides an exact measure of that opportunity. Poirot moved carefully around the spiral staircase, his eyes catching every minute detail. The subtle scuff on the top step, almost invisible, the faint smear on the banister, and the way the candlelight reflected differently on certain sections of the worn wood. Each, he noted silently, was a part of the larger tapestry of events. Lena Harper swallowed hard. Daniel argued, with someone shortly before the storm reached its peak, she admitted. Her voice was soft, hesitant. It was not a loud argument, just a disagreement. Words exchanged in private, heated, but not violent. I do not know who it was with. Exactly, he would not tell me. Poirot's moustache twitched subtly. Ah, so we have both motive and tension. Daniel's exposure of financial wrongdoing provided motive. An argument provides opportunity, a moment of human weakness, perhaps a misjudgment, and the storm ensures isolation, preventing interference. The elements themselves become accomplices. Captain Sinclair, his expression troubled, leaned closer. So the killer knew Daniel's movements, his intentions. But how did they act so precisely, and why leave the watch? Poirot's eyes glimmered with small satisfaction. The watch, Captain, is not merely a timepiece. It is a signature, consciously or unconsciously left by the hand that struck Daniel. It records, silently, the moment of the act, like footprints in sand or a dropped glove, small, almost imperceptible, yet profound. The murderer may believe it is inconsequential, but for the trained eye, it is invaluable. Miss Clara Jennings stepped forward, her sketchpad open, and pointed to a faint mark near the staircase landing. This, I noticed it when I first came up. A faint smear. I thought it was water from the rain, but now perhaps it is blood. Poirot crouched and examined the area closely. Indeed, mademoiselle. Water alone would not account for the tiny red hue on the grain of the wood, and its location precisely where the watch lies. The act was deliberate, the path calculated. The murderer moved with intention, leaving traces subtle enough for the untrained eye to miss, yet clear to one who observes. Miss Lena Harper's hands trembled as she placed her folder on the table. Poirot did not immediately touch it, but allowed it to be visible. Mademoiselle, he said softly, this folder, containing Daniel's planned revelations, might illuminate not only motive but method, and yet there is a danger. Those who fear exposure may act again. One must be vigilant. Mark Fletcher muttered something under his breath about headlines, but Poirot's sharp eyes met his with a small, steady glare. Monsieur Fletcher, he said. A true journalist does not merely record events. He perceives them, and to perceive is to understand what lies beneath the surface. One must observe, yes, but also interpret, deduce, and act with clarity. Tonight, the surface lies are many. The truth is hidden, but not beyond reach. Old Samuel, silent until now, finally spoke. I have seen many storms, many tempests in my life, both at sea and here in this tower. The storm is but a mask. It conceals, but also reveals. Watch, timing, argument, motive, all point to the same fact. The hand that struck Daniel is clever, it is careful, it is calculating, and it is human. Poirot nodded. Yes, Samuel, and human, therefore fallible. A single oversight, an overlooked detail, a misstep, a discarded item, can unravel even the most meticulous plan. And in this, mes amis, the broken watch, may be the key. It marks not just the hour, but the very point at which opportunity and intent intersect. The storm outside continued its relentless assault. Candles flickered against the walls, shadows leaping and twisting like spirits. The lighthouse, already a crucible of tension and fear, seemed to shrink in the minds of its occupants. Each person's anxiety was compounded by isolation, by awareness that the murderer was among them, and by the realization that the smallest act, the tiniest slip, could reveal all. Poirot's small eyes scanned the group carefully. Mes amis, he said softly. Tonight, every detail matters. The argument, the folder, the watch. Each is a thread in the tapestry of truth, and it is my task to weave them together, patiently, methodically, until the final pattern emerges. The motive is known, yes, financial exposure, but the method, that is yet concealed, and it will be revealed, in time, by observation, patience, and reason. Thus, Chapter 5 concluded with the lighthouse trembling under the storm, shadows flickering on walls, and a detective's mind at work, untangling the strands of human behavior, timing, and opportunity. Outside, nature raged. Inside, the human heart and mind held the secrets to murder, waiting for Poirot to reveal the careful, meticulous truth. Chapter 6, the lighthouse logged the storm outside, showed no sign of relenting. The rain lashed at the cliffs in torrents, the wind shrieked through every crevice of Charcoal Point Lighthouse, and the waves crashed below, like the relentless hammering of some giant fist. Inside, the atmosphere had grown thick with unease. Candlelight flickered, casting elongated shadows on the walls that seemed to twist and whisper, reflecting the tension that had settled among the survivors. Poirot, seated near the fireplace with his precise posture and folded hands, surveyed the group. Each individual bore the marks of the long night, worry etched into their faces, hands twisting nervously, eyes darting about the room as though shadows themselves might spring to life. He noted every subtle gesture, the quivering of Lena Harper's fingers, the restlessness of Mark Fletcher's pen, Samuel's ever-watchful gaze, and catalogued them quietly in his mind. It was Samuel, at last, who provided the next crucial piece of evidence. Moving slowly, his voice deliberate and measured, he retrieved the lighthouse logbook from a small, locked cabinet near the common room. The book, leather, bound and weathered from decades of use, had always been regarded as a mundane record of daily activities, weather conditions, light maintenance, ship passages. But tonight, in the hands of a meticulous observer, it became a repository of secrets, timing, and opportunity. "Here," Samuel said, placing the logbook on the table. His fingers, knotted with age, turned the pages with care. "Everything is recorded here. Every time the light is checked, every adjustment noted. Even tonight, despite the storm, I have kept meticulous records. You will see, Monsieur Poirot, the truth is often hidden in plain sight." Poirot leaned forward, his small eyes narrowing as he examined the pages. Candlelight glinted off the ink, revealing the neat, precise entries that chronicled each hour, the wind's force, the tide's rise, the adjustments to the light mechanism. But one entry caught his attention, and his lips twitched in a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Ah, here it is," Poirot murmured, pointing to the entry for 9:30 p.m. Observe. "Mes amis, the lantern room is noted as locked. Samuel, correct?" Samuel nodded solemnly. "Yes, I secured the room at 9:30. The key was placed in the cabinet as usual. No one enters without proper authorization." Poirot's eyes swept across the group. "And who, mes amis, possesses the spare key?" There was a brief pause, the weight of expectation pressing down on the room. Samuel's eyes were steady. "Only one person," he said. "Mark Fletcher, the reporter. He requested it earlier in the evening, claiming he wished to experience the lighthouse without interruption, to have a quiet story. He was granted access at 7 p.m. and returned the key promptly at 8 p.m., but he retains possession of the spare, as protocol dictates." A ripple of tension passed through the room. Mark Fletcher, seated at the far end near the window, stiffened. His pen paused mid-scribble, and his sharp eyes flicked nervously toward Poirot. Yes, I had the spare key," he admitted, his voice tight. "I asked for it to ensure I could access the lantern room quietly. I had no idea it would be involved in." Poirot's small hand raised gently, halting him. No need to interrupt. We are merely observing facts. Possession of a key does not in itself indicate guilt, but it is, mes amis, an essential element in the unfolding mystery. Timing, access, and intention converge here." Lena Harper's eyes narrowed. "So he could have entered without anyone seeing him?" she asked quietly, almost in disbelief. "Even during the storm?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, mademoiselle. With the spare key, one may enter unnoticed. And the log confirms that Daniel Harper was alone near the lantern room shortly after 9:30. The very hour when opportunity arose. The storm ensures isolation. The lighthouse becomes a closed stage, each actor trapped within its walls. The question is, of course, who acted and why?" Captain Sinclair leaned forward, his expression troubled. "But why would a reporter, of all people, need access, and why would he be involved in this?" Poirot's small eyes glimmered with precision. "Ah, Captain, that is precisely the point. One does not require access to commit a murder without motive. The spare key offers opportunity. The motive must be deduced from observation, conversation, and psychology. Let us consider, mes amis, that each of you has secrets, fears, or grudges. The storm may conceal, but it does not erase. It is the human heart that provides the motive." Samuel, observing the group silently, finally spoke again. "I have watched them all tonight," he said, his voice low. "The tension, the glances, the hushed conversations. There is one among them whose nervousness is different from the rest. A small twitch in the eye, a hesitation in movement, a subtle reaction to questions. It is not proof, but it is indication." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing across his lips. "Ah, Samuel, your observation is most valuable. It is indeed the subtle reactions, the imperceptible tells, that reveal intent, timing, access, and motive form the foundation. And yet, method remains hidden. How did the murderer act? With what implement? What strategy? That is the question to be solved." Mark Fletcher, clearly uncomfortable under the weight of scrutiny, finally spoke again. I did not enter the lantern room after 8 o'clock. He insisted. "I was here, in the common room, recording the storm, writing notes for my story. I would never. I had no reason." His voice faltered, leaving his sentence suspended in the air. Poirot inclined his head politely. "Monsieur Fletcher, the truth often requires patience. Denial is neither proof nor disproof. Observation, logic, and deduction shall reveal all. But let it be noted, access, opportunity, and presence are intertwined, and the log confirms the timeline. It is here, in these seemingly mundane entries, that one begins to reconstruct the chain of events." Lena Harper, trembling slightly, finally opened her folder, revealing documents detailing financial discrepancies, accounting errors, and evidence of fraud. "Daniel was going to confront the board," she said softly. "Tonight. That is why he returned so late to the lighthouse. He was prepared to act. I should have known someone might try to stop him." Poirot examined the folder carefully, then turned his gaze toward the group. "Observe, mes amis. Motivation is clear. Financial exposure provides reason. Access is confirmed. Mark holds the spare key. Timing is recorded. The log indicates 9:30 for securing the lantern room. But the method... the method remains concealed. That, as always, is the puzzle. And to solve it, one must consider not only fact, but psychology, environment, and human behavior under duress." Captain Sinclair's face was pale. So the killer acted with calculation. They knew the timing, the isolation, and Daniel's intent. It could not have been a random act. "Precisely," Poirot said. Fingers steepled before him. "Every detail matters. Captain, the watch stopped at 9:40. The lantern room was locked at 9:30. The storm ensures no interference. The human mind acts even in desperation, but never without leaving a trace. And those traces, my friends, are what I observe. It is not only the evidence left behind, but the behavior of those who remain that reveals the solution." The storm raged on, a relentless backdrop to human tension and subtle deception. Shadows flickered in the candlelight. The lighthouse felt smaller and more confining than ever, and every glance exchanged between the guests carried weight. Samuel watched silently. Lena clutched her folder tightly, and Mark shifted uneasily, aware that Poirot's keen mind had already noted inconsistencies. Poirot, small and composed, surveyed the room. In the lighthouse log, in the cracked watch, in the subtle reactions of the people around him, lay the path to discovery. The pieces were present, yet still needed careful assembly. Tonight, he thought, the human heart and the intricacies of human behavior would illuminate the darkness as surely as the lighthouse beam cut through the storm. And thus, Chapter 6 closed with a sense of revelation. The lantern room had been locked, the timeline recorded, and one individual possessed the spare key. Motive, opportunity, and access converged, yet method remained elusive. A final mystery for Hercule Poirot to untangle. Chapter 7. Truth over coffee. The storm outside had begun to wane. Though the rain still pattered insistently against the windows, and the wind hummed a low, mournful tune along the cliffs. Inside Charcoal Point Lighthouse, the atmosphere had grown taut with anticipation and unspoken dread. Shadows, long and flickering from the remaining candles, seemed to linger longer than their sources, as if even the darkness wished to eavesdrop on the unfolding truth. Hercule Poirot, small and immaculately composed, sat at the long wooden table in the common room, a cup of steaming coffee before him. The aroma, rich and slightly bitter, filled the air, a strangely comforting contrast to the storm-tossed night. He stirred it gently with a silver spoon, his eyes fixed upon the assembled group. Each face bore traces of fatigue, fear, and the weight of secrets. Now teetering on the brink of revelation, Miss Lena Harper, still clutching her folder, cast nervous glances toward Mark Fletcher. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the tension she struggled to conceal. Mark sat rigidly, his pen resting uselessly beside him, his notes abandoned. Captain Sinclair and Samuel stood quietly, as if their silence alone lent authority to the proceedings. Clara Jennings observed intently, her artist's eye noting every micro-expression. Poirot placed his cup on the table with a delicate clink, leaning forward. Mesdames, we have observed, noted, and considered. The storm outside may rage, but the storm within the human heart is far more revealing tonight. The truth must emerge. There is no longer room for hesitation, no space for concealment. Let us speak plainly. Mark's eyes flickered nervously toward the detective, his face pale. I don't understand, he stammered, his voice barely audible. I didn't. Poirot inclined his head slightly, his piercing gaze unyielding. Monsieur Fletcher, you see, the evidence speaks for itself. The lighthouse log confirms the time, the broken watch marks the moment of action, and your possession of the spare key provides the means. Motive is also clear. Daniel Harper intended to reveal a truth that would have ruined your credibility. And the act itself, Poirot paused, tapping his fingers lightly, was not born of rage, but fear. You panicked. You acted in haste. Mark's pen slipped from his fingers. He pressed his palms against the table, his body trembling. I didn't mean to. I never wanted to hurt him, he whispered. It was just a moment, I thought. He was going to expose me, ruin me. I didn't think. His voice cracked, and the sentences dissolved into ragged breaths. Poirot's small eyes softened slightly, though his reasoning remained razor sharp. Ah, yes, fear can be a powerful motivator. Even the most composed individual may falter when the prospect of disgrace looms large. And in that moment, mesdames, reason is replaced by instinct and caution by panic. That is what occurred. One blow, unfortunate yet decisive, delivered not in malice, but in a desperate attempt to prevent exposure. Lena Harper's lips parted as though to speak, but she could only shake her head slightly, her hands clutching the folder as if it contained the fragments of her own shock. You mean, he didn't plan it, she whispered. It was just a mistake. Poirot nodded. Precisely, mademoiselle. Premeditation is absent. What we have is a culmination of fear, opportunity, and human frailty. The storm outside may conceal, but it does not excuse. The act was sudden, improvised, and yet, as always, even the smallest gesture leaves its mark. Captain Sinclair exhaled sharply, running a hand over his weathered face. So, All this time, the method was hidden by panic, by circumstance, and by the storm, and the clues, watch, log, observation, they were enough to reveal it. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the table. Ah yes, Captain, the method is often obscured by the chaos of events. But the observant eye sees, the careful mind connects, and the smallest traces, timing, access, reaction, form the pattern. It is not brute force or theatrics that reveal truth. It is logic, observation, and patience. And patience, mes amis, has brought us here. Mark's head dropped into his hands, and a heavy silence fell upon the room. The only sound was the low murmur of the dying storm and the faint drip of rain from a slightly ajar window. Even the candles seemed to hold their breath, as if awaiting the final pieces of understanding. Poirot rose slowly, placing a hand lightly on the table. Mes amis. The broken watch at 9:40 marks the moment of action. The log indicates the room was locked at 9:30, ensuring that no one could interfere. Monsieur Fletcher, with access to the spare key, acted in a moment of panic when confronted with the inevitability of exposure. The blow was delivered with a small, blunt instrument, a tool at hand, not premeditated weaponry. And in that moment, life was taken, but not with rage, with fear. Samuel, who had remained silent through most of the confrontation, finally spoke. I watched them all tonight. I saw hesitation, fear, and intention. It is remarkable, Monsieur Poirot, how small gestures reveal the truth. Mark's hands, his avoidance, his frantic note-taking. It all pointed to anxiety that only a guilty conscience can produce. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, Samuel, observation, mes amis, is more powerful than confession. The guilty reveal themselves, often unconsciously, through behavior, expression, and reaction. And the human heart, under duress, is most transparent to one trained in detection. Mark looked up, his face pale and eyes brimming with tears. I should have come forward, he said hoarsely. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I panicked. I never meant. Poirot placed a hand gently on his arm. Do not despair entirely, Monsieur Fletcher. While the act was grave, the circumstances and intent are clear. The legal authorities will assess consequences. Yes, but the moral truth, the understanding of what occurred, is now revealed. And that is the essence of justice, n'est pas? The room remained silent for a long moment, the weight of revelation settling over the group like a tangible presence. Even the rain seemed to soften, the wind less insistent. The storm outside was a mirror of the turbulence within, yet both had found their temporary resolution in the disclosure of truth. Lena Harper closed her folder, her hands trembling slightly, though her expression had softened. So Daniel's fears were justified, she murmured. And yet, the truth comes out now, after all this suffering. Poirot nodded, his small eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Yes, mademoiselle, fear, opportunity, and circumstance often converge in unexpected ways. But observation, logic, and understanding, these illuminate the darkness most effectively. The human heart is revealed, and the consequences, both emotional and practical, may now be faced with clarity. Clara Jennings, who had remained silent, finally spoke. It's strange, she said softly, how the storm seemed to mask everything, yet all the pieces were here, waiting to be seen. Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. Ah, exactly, mademoiselle. Storms conceal, yes, but they also clarify. They test the patience and perception of the observer. And tonight, patience and observation have triumphed over fear and concealment. Truth, after all, is patient. It only requires a mind willing to follow its subtle threads. The group remained seated, each contemplating the revelation in their own way. Mark's shoulders sagged, the enormity of his actions finally settling over him. Lena's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes reflected a newfound understanding. Samuel's gaze remained steady, observing the human dynamics as only a man of experience could. Captain Sinclair exhaled slowly, the tension in his body easing and Clara's eyes glimmered with the insight she had gained from witnessing the psychological unraveling. Poirot, small and precise, sipped his coffee. The storm outside had lessened to a whisper. The waves a muted rhythm against the cliffs. The lighthouse, though battered by nature, stood steadfast, much like the truth itself, which had emerged victorious, patiently, through observation, deduction, and the unmasking of fear-driven human behavior. And in that quiet moment, the final piece fell into place. The murderer had been revealed not through force or accusation, but through careful observation, the subtle evidence of a human heart undone by panic, and the patient, unwavering intellect of Hercule Poirot. The room, though heavy with emotion, now held a sense of resolution. The storm within the lighthouse had passed, leaving clarity, understanding, and the knowledge that the night's mystery had been meticulously unraveled by the master detective. Chapter 8. Morning Light. The first faint blush of dawn crept over Charcoal Point, casting a soft golden light across the cliffside and the restless sea below. The storm, which had raged through the night with unrelenting fury, had finally spent its rage. Rain, slicked rocks shimmered, reflecting the early sun in fragmented brilliance, and the tide, once tumultuous, had receded to reveal the jagged outline of the cliffs. Charcoal Point Lighthouse stood stoic and unyielding, its beacon now calm and steady, no longer threatened by tempestuous winds. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. Gone was the oppressive tension of the previous night. Replaced now was a contemplative quiet, broken only by the occasional creak of timber as the lighthouse settled. The events of the night hung in the air like an invisible fog, tense, heavy, yet now illuminated by clarity. The group, weary but relieved, moved slowly about the common room, each absorbed in their own reflections on the revelations that had unfolded. Hercule Poirot, ever composed, sat at the long wooden table with a cup of steaming coffee, its aroma mingling with the fresh scent of rain seeping through the slightly ajar window. The liquid, warm and comforting, seemed almost to anchor him amidst the subdued chaos of human emotion and the quiet aftermath of storm and crime. He stirred it gently, the movements deliberate and measured, reflecting the calm precision of his mind. Mark Fletcher sat nearby, his shoulders slumped and face pale. The enormity of the previous night's actions weighed upon him heavily. His eyes, now less defiant and more resigned, followed Poirot's every movement. He had confessed under careful questioning, admitting that panic and fear of exposure had driven him to strike Daniel Harper. The act, unplanned yet fatal, had been carried out in a moment of desperation, fear overpowering reason. Lena Harper, still clutching the folder that had revealed the financial discrepancies, sat quietly. Relief mingled with sorrow in her expression. Daniel's foresight had been justified, yet his life had been cut short by a cascade of human frailty and misjudgment. She glanced at Poirot, gratitude in her eyes. "He would have wanted the truth revealed," she said softly, her voice trembling. Samuel, the assistant lighthouse keeper, observed the group with the patience of a man who had witnessed countless storms both outside and within human hearts. "It is remarkable," he said, his voice steady and deliberate, "how nature and human nature intertwine. The storm outside conceals, but it also clarifies. It tests patience, perception, and character." Poirot nodded subtly, acknowledging the wisdom in Samuel's words. "Ah, Samuel, you understand. Nature has a way of exposing truth. The tempest may obscure details, yes, but it cannot disguise the subtle traces left by human action. Fear, opportunity, and motive leave marks, as indelible as footprints in sand, if one only observes with care." Captain Sinclair, having spent the night coordinating the group and ensuring their safety, stepped forward. "Poirot, you have solved what seemed an impossible puzzle. How did you know so precisely that Mark was responsible? Even the storm, the isolation, and the broken watch seemed circumstantial." Poirot's small eyes twinkled with quiet satisfaction. "Ah, Captain, the truth is always hidden in plain sight. Observe, the watch stopped at 9:40. A moment coinciding with opportunity, the lantern room was locked at 9:30, recorded meticulously in the log. Only one person possessed the spare key. Motive was clear, financial exposure threatened reputation. And finally, the subtle reactions, the micro-expressions, hesitation, anxiety, the unconscious gestures of guilt, all pointed to the individual. It is not brute strength or spectacle that reveals the culprit, but observation, reasoning, and the patient study of human nature. Mark Fletcher's voice broke the stillness. I panicked. I only wanted to prevent my lies from being exposed. I never thought, Daniel. His words dissolved into silence, replaced by the muted sounds of the receding storm and the lighthouse's steady creaks. Poirot inclined his head, his tone gentle yet firm. Monsieur Fletcher, the act is grievous. Yes, but understanding the cause allows justice and moral comprehension to follow. It was fear, not malice, that guided your hand. The law will judge accordingly, but the clarity of truth has been restored, and that is the essential first step toward resolution. Lena Harper closed her folder and exhaled slowly. Daniel would have wanted his findings known, even if it cost him his life, she murmured. And now it is done. The truth is out. Samuel nodded. Indeed, storms have a way of forcing secrets into the open. They strip away pretension, expose hidden actions, and remind us of the fragile nature of human morality. Poirot rose, small but precise, and moved to the window overlooking the calm sea. He rested his hands lightly on the sill, observing the sunlight glinting off the waves. Mes amis, he said softly. Some places, like this lighthouse, keep secrets. The sea, the storm, and the isolation create a theater for human emotion and action. But as we see, no secret can resist careful observation and reason. Storms, literal or metaphorical, bring them to light, and the light of understanding is, in its way, as enduring as the beacon above the cliff. Clara Jennings, who had been silently observing the group, finally spoke. It's strange, she said, how chaos reveals what calm conceals. The storm outside, the fear inside, both work together to show the truth. Poirot nodded, sipping the last of his coffee. Exactly, mademoiselle. Nature tests patience. Humans reveal themselves under pressure, and the observant mind pieces the puzzle together. That is the art of detection, understanding not merely the act, but the heart behind it, the circumstances, and the sequence of events that allow clarity to emerge. All else is illusion. Outside, the lighthouse stood proudly, its beacon cutting through the morning light, as if nothing had happened. Ships at a distance caught glimpses of its steady glow, unaware of the storm that had passed, the human drama that had unfolded, or the secrets that had been exposed within its walls. Authorities arrived soon after, their presence marking the transition from night's terror to orderly investigation. Statements were taken, formal procedures initiated, and the human actors in the drama faced the consequences of their actions. Mark Fletcher, though remorseful, was guided toward justice. Lena Harper retained the documents that would reveal the financial fraud. Samuel returned to his quiet duties, observing the lighthouse with his characteristic patience. Captain Sinclair ensured the safety and well-being of all, and Clara Jennings quietly recorded impressions, her mind capturing both the storm and its revelations. Poirot remained at the table, finishing the last sip of coffee, the steam curling upward, like a delicate thread connecting the night's events with the morning's clarity. The lighthouse, having survived both the storm and the human drama it enclosed, was calm once more. The shadows receded, replaced by the honest illumination of day. As he rose and adjusted his suit with meticulous care, Poirot reflected quietly, human nature, like the sea, is unpredictable. Fear, greed, and desperation can drive even the most careful individual to unintended acts. But reason, observation, and patience, the tools of the detective's craft, can illuminate the truth with a brilliance as enduring as the lighthouse's own beam. He stepped to the door, casting one final glance across the calm, restored room. Some places, he murmured, almost to himself, keep secrets, but storms always bring them out. And with that, the morning light, gentle yet unyielding, fell upon Charcoal Point Lighthouse, bathing it in clarity, understanding, and the quiet resolution of a storm that had exposed both the elements and the hearts of men.